Golden light from a crystal chandelier spilled onto the long, white-clothed dining table, shimmering in a glass of swirling red wine. The air in the vast penthouse was strangely quiet, broken only by the gentle clink of silverware on Italian porcelain and the soft drumming of rain against the enormous glass window behind them. Tonight, CEO Leonard Vaughn, known throughout the startup world as the turnaround king, had opened his private home to a guest he had never met, and the moment his eyes met hers, everything inside him froze. The necklace, a delicate white gold chain, dangling just below the young woman's collarbone. The pendant was a half-moon, engraved with a single, sharp L, so old that the edges of the letter had worn smooth. Leonard knew he was staring, knew it was impolite, but he couldn't tear his eyes away, because he had seen it before. Not just seen it, it had once been in his hand, on a night he had sworn to bury forever. "Dad, this is Emily." His daughter Claire's voice rang out, full of excitement. The 19-year-old smiled, placing a hand on her friend's shoulder as if to say, "Dad, I'm proud to introduce this person." Emily smiled faintly, her eyes both gentle and confident. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Vaughn." Leonard gave a slight nod but didn't reply. The room seemed to lose its sound, replaced by the heavy thud of his own heart in his ears. In that moment, he saw again the smoky smell of a hospital room, heard the wail of an ambulance siren, and felt the drop of blood hitting the white-tiled floor, along with this very necklace lying still in his palm. His wife Elaine's voice broke the silence. "Please, have a seat. Emily." She shot a questioning look at Leonard, trying to read what had just happened. He answered with a forced smile, but under the table, his hand gripped his wineglass so tightly his knuckles turned white. They began dinner. Claire chattered about her study groups at school, about a coding project Emily was mentoring for elementary school kids at a community center. Elaine asked a few polite questions, which Emily answered in a soft but not timid voice. Leonard tried to maintain his composure, but his eyes were still drawn to the necklace. It moved with every breath Emily took, glittering under the light, as if taunting him. "That's a beautiful necklace," Elaine remarked, half genuine, half probing. Emily looked down, a faint smile on her lips. "Oh, it's not an heirloom. To be honest, I don't know where it came from. It's the only thing I've had since I was a baby. I grew up in the foster care system. They said this necklace was found with me when I was left on a doorstep. No one knows who my mother was." The wineglass nearly slipped from Leonard's hand. Elaine glanced quickly at her husband, but he had already turned his face away. His heart hammered, as if every word Emily had just spoken was a blow to the fortress he had spent 20 years building. Emily smiled lightly, as if to ease the heaviness. "I tried to find information once, but there wasn't much. This was it." Leonard took a deep breath, but the suffocating feeling in his chest didn't subside. He knew this story wasn't over, and if he let it continue, this room would never be the same again. Have you ever had a moment where one tiny detail brings the entire past rushing back, strong enough to shatter the present? Stay tuned, because what Emily brought with her that night would drag an entire empire into the light. Elaine invited everyone to the main course, but Leonard barely touched his food. In his mind, the sound of the rain grew louder, mingling with the hurried footsteps in a hospital corridor and someone's whisper. "She'll be safe if no one knows," Claire said excitedly. "Dad, Emily is amazing at robotics too. She once—" Leonard didn't hear the rest. His gaze fell on Emily's hand as she held her water glass, a hand with a thin scar running along the thumb. He knew that scar. It was unmistakable. Emily unconsciously fiddled with the pendant, a nervous habit. Leonard almost shot up from his chair but restrained himself. Instead, he put his glass down and said, his voice low, "Emily, have you ever tried to find your birth parents?" Emily froze for a moment. Her warm gaze turned wary. "I did, but I stopped." When I was 15, I applied for my non-identifying records. A week later, I received an anonymous email with just one sentence. Stop digging. Some graves are sealed for a reason. No sender, nothing else. I got scared, and I stopped. Elaine swallowed, looking at Leonard. He didn't blink. And, you believed it? Emily shrugged, but her voice fell. I figured, if they wanted to hide, it was probably for a dangerous reason. Or, they just didn't want me to know. Claire broke the tension with a clumsy joke, but no one laughed. Leonard rested his chin on his hand, hiding the slight tremor in his lips. He knew. He knew more than anyone else in this room, and he also knew if he let this story continue, everything would change. Dinner ended in a soft but searing silence, as if everyone had just swallowed a secret with sharp edges. Claire said she wanted to show Emily the hanging garden, where she always lit scented candles on rainy nights, and the two girls left the table. Elaine took her linen napkin and gently dabbed at a faint pink wine stain next to her plate, her movements so calm they were almost theatrical. She looked up and met Leonard's eyes. Neither spoke, but a silent conversation passed between their gazes and their throats. Elaine was the first to break the ice. You know that necklace? She said softly. More a statement than a question. Leonard put down his spoon. I've seen it, he replied, his voice as rough as sandpaper. Where? A heartbeat. 2. The memory reached the edge of his words. But Leonard held it back, like a man on a cliff's edge who knows that another half-step will send him into a bottomless abyss. A hospital, he said, his eyes still fixed on the table. A long time ago. Elaine took a sharp, small breath, like a diver plunging into cold water. She just said it was the only thing with her on that doorstep, she said. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Or something else? Leonard looked at his wife. A weariness flowed through his bones, the feeling of a man who had carried a heavy load for a very long time, and now realized the real journey was just beginning. I don't know, he admitted. But if I let this go, I won't be myself anymore. Then don't let it go. Elaine put her napkin down. Call the girls back in. We'll ask to see the papers. Tonight. The glass sliding door opened. Claire and Emily returned, their hair and shoulders sprinkled with fine silver raindrops. It's raining harder, Claire chirped, her eyes trying to spark joy. Emily stood with her arms crossed warmly over her chest. The pendant was now clamped between her index finger and thumb, a habit of self-reassurance. Elaine smiled gently. Emily, would you mind if we took a look at some of the papers from your childhood? Only what you're comfortable with, of course. If tonight is inconvenient, another day is fine. Emily hesitated for a moment, a wariness learned from many temporary homes. But her gaze settled on Leonard, and she saw in his eyes something both fragile and determined, like a door left ajar but bolted with conscience. Yes, I have them at my place. It's not much, but if you'd like to see, we can stop by. Now, Leonard said. If you don't mind. Emily nodded. Okay. The night rain coated the asphalt with a metallic sheen, the streetlights shattering into spots in every puddle. The black SUV glided past glass-clad avenues before turning into a lower neighborhood, where old brick and exterior iron staircases held their breath to listen to the rain. Emily's apartment was on the 3rd floor, the railing cold to the touch, the smell of the old hallway, a mix of dampness and cheap soap and a sprig of fresh mint someone had just left on a windowsill. The door opened to a small but tidy space, with books stacked in columns, a few pencil sketches temporarily taped to the wall with brown tape. A stubby cactus leaned by the window. An old laptop screen cast a pale blue glow. That metal box. Emily pointed to the corner by her bed. She knelt down, pulled a small fireproof box from underneath, typed in a code, and opened it. Inside, a faded manila envelope, a few photocopied pages with smeared ink, a tattered medical card, and a folded napkin. Elaine sat down beside her, not touching anything until Emily placed it in her hands, like a small ritual to preserve dignity. Leonard stood a step away, hands in his pockets, his heart beating to a different rhythm. The first page was an emergency room intake form. Female, approx. 5-7 days old. Found at the entrance of St. Gabriel's Clinic, 2:17 a.m. With infant. Silver necklace, with half-moon pendant engraved with the letter L. No identification, no injuries, low body temperature. There was a faded public hospital stamp and the signature of the doctor on duty, the handwriting so sharp it was cold. The second page was a note written by a social worker, in neat, slanted handwriting. Female caller, voice approx. 30-42nd, educated. Did not disclose name. Repeated 3 times. Please keep her safe. Don't let them find her. The word "them" was underlined. Below, in smaller handwriting, seemingly added by someone else later. Camera malfunctioning due to rain. No footage. Elaine glanced at the napkin. Emily unfolded it. In the center were 2 words, scrawled but decisive, as if written in a moving car. Keep her. On the edge of the paper was a faint brown stain, perhaps coffee, or something else that was once warm and had long since grown cold. Leonard closed his eyes. In that darkness, another room appeared. A quiet waiting room. The hum of the air conditioner. The smell of chemical cleaners. The white light so bright it seemed to pierce the skin. A woman with her dark hair hastily tied up, her face drained of color, pressing her lips to a baby's forehead. A man much younger than the Leonard of today stood beside her, his hands trembling uselessly. They'll come. We have to go, someone had said. It wasn't clear who the old memory was like burnt film. Some frames blacked out, others scorched red. Then the necklace. A nod. A closing door. Do you have the anonymous email from when you were 15? Elaine asked, her voice as soft as if speaking to someone holding their last fragment of memory. Emily nodded, opened her laptop, and typed in her password. The inbox was a patchwork of self-assigned color labels. She opened an old email, subject blank, sender blank, only a server ID showing like a broken piece of code. The content, stop digging. Some graves are sealed for a reason. The period was cold. Nothing more. Nothing less. Leonard sat down at the desk, a muscle in his jaw twitching as if from a small electric shock. Did you reply? He asked. Emily shook her head. I deleted it, then restored it, then just left it there. I thought whoever sent this was either protecting me or protecting themselves. She looked down at her pendant, her fingers unconsciously tracing the worn edges of the L. What does it mean to you? Leonard asked. The L? Who is it? I don't know, Emily said with a faint smile. I used to think it stood for lucky. I joked about it to myself once. Then for a while, I hated it. Sometimes, I only wear it because if I take it off, my neck feels too empty. Like I'm missing an answer I'm not sure I want anymore. Elaine leaned her shoulder lightly against the bed, her eyes soft with a gentle sadness, the sadness of an adult who knows the world rarely gives back what it takes. If tonight is too much, we can stop. No one chases an answer at the cost of your peace, she said, her words round like an umbrella. Emily looked up, meeting Elaine's eyes. I'm okay. I think, tonight I want to know if I was right to be afraid or wrong, to give up. Leonard stood up. There's a way, he said. Quick and quiet. No public records. If you agree, we can do a test. He paused, hearing his own words and a layer of meaning at their core. A test to determine the degree of relation. Emily was silent, then nodded. I agree. But before we do, I want to ask one question. Go ahead, Elaine said. Emily turned to Leonard. Why did your hands shake when you heard about the doorstep in the hospital? Why do you know this scar? She held up her hand, the thin scar on her thumb glinting in the yellow light. My friend said newborns rarely have scars. Unless, Leonard couldn't evade it. He looked at the scar, then at the girl's face, where features that didn't belong to him still knocked on something within him. One night, he began, his voice low. A friend called me, said to meet at St. Gabriel's clinic. It was pouring rain. They had a baby wrapped in a coat. And, while taking the baby to the car, there was a piece of broken glass. I, the clumsy man, I touched the shard instead of avoiding it. The cut was very fine. I thought it would fade. He swallowed hard. I told myself everything would eventually fade. Emily stared at him without blinking. The rain outside the window sounded like someone was writing something very fast on the sky and then wiping it away. So that night, you were there, she said, as if confirming it to herself. You could be related. I was there, Leonard said. But I don't know everything. I know too little to sleep peacefully, and too much to speak of it right now. He suddenly found himself being more honest with a girl wearing an L pendant than he had ever been with auditoriums full of people. Elaine placed a hand on Emily's arm. If you want to rest, we stop. If you want to continue, we continue. But on your terms. Emily nodded, folded the envelope, placed it back in the fireproof box, keeping only the napkin. She flipped it over, its blank white side facing her. Then she said, Continue. The penthouse living room welcomed them back with the scent of oak and freshly arranged camellias in a designer crystal vase. Claire had gone to her room, leaving a note on the table. Going to bed. Don't stay up late arguing. See. Elaine smiled sadly, tucking the note into the frame of a family photo. Leonard went straight to the bookshelf, pulled out an old novel, revealing a small wall-mounted safe. The code was long, the keys beeping softly. The safe door opened, releasing a cool metallic scent. Inside, another, thicker envelope, and a small dark blue velvet box. He placed them all on the table. No one rushed to open them. There are some envelopes that one must look at for a long time, like looking into the eyes of a loved one, to remember why they were hidden before deciding whether to betray oneself. Leonard opened the velvet box first. Inside was another half-moon pendant, engraved with an L, but its edges were still sharp, its gold sheen as if it had just left the jeweler's hands. Elaine glanced at it quickly, like someone seeing a long-lost twin for the first time. Emily leaned forward slightly, her breath thin. Leonard reached out, placing the new pendant on the table, a confession's length away from the one Emily was wearing. The two half-moons lay side by side, like two scraps of dialogue from an unfinished script. Then he opened the envelope. Photographs spilled out. A Polaroid of a woman with her dark hair pinned up, a slanted smile on her face, and on her neck, the very same half-moon pendant with the L. On the edge of the photo, in fine marker, someone had written Lena. There was another one. Lena standing in front of a sign for Lumen Analytics, Beta Lab, wearing a white lab coat, her eyes smiling but tired. A report printed from an old email, titled Incident Report, Fire in Beta Lab, 2:13 a.m., with a section highlighted in red, No casualties reported, minor equipment damage. And at the bottom, an internal memo from his company nearly 2 decades ago. Public announcement delayed, pending cause verification. All communications, through legal. Someone's colored pen had circled a handwritten note in the margin. They'll come, hide her. Emily gently touched the corner of the photo with the name Lena, her finger trembling slightly. Who is she? Leonard stared for a long time, as if asking the past for permission to speak. "The best data engineer I ever knew," he said. "The one who made me believe that truth always has a structure no matter how messy it gets." He swallowed the name stuck in his throat. "And the one who wore this pendant before you, the L, is for Lena," Elaine said, her eyes never leaving Leonard's. The statement sounded not like a discovery, but like someone placing the last piece of a puzzle and realizing the picture didn't match what memory had promised. Leonard nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. It could be many things. Lumen was the name of the lab. Lena was the one who wore it. Leonard is the one who always thought he could keep everything in his hands. He gave a dry laugh. And L could be anything when people don't want to use the right name. Emily sat down at the table, as if afraid standing would make her knees betray her. That night, the lab fire was at 2:13. "I was left at the clinic's doorstep at 2:17, she said slowly, assembling the numbers like wooden blocks. "Someone called and said to keep me safe. That they would come." "Who are they?" Elaine asked. Leonard looked at the space behind the window where his reflection was as thin as a stranger's. "They are the people who didn't want a report to become a reality," he said. "A machine learning model detecting an anomaly. An alert being silenced. A lab overheating. A small fire. A big story if it hit the papers. And a child unintentionally at the center of it all." He paused, his breath escaping in a sad smile. "When adults make mistakes, they often push children to the edge of the story. Tonight, perhaps the story is reclaiming its center." Emily tilted her head, as if listening closely to the rhythm of a falling drop of water. "So, am I Lena's daughter?" The question traveled through the empty room and stopped in front of Leonard. Leonard didn't answer right away. He remembered the cheap shampoo smell of the hospital, remembered the way Lena had placed the pendant in his hand once while standing on a balcony, saying, "If there's ever a day I can't tell the story, let this tell it for me." He also remembered how scared he was. Scared of the company collapsing, of being seen as reckless, of choosing a person over a growth chart. There are seasons in life when one follows fear, like a map. I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know this. If you want the answer, I will walk with you until we have it. No lawyers. No conditions." Elaine glanced at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Surprise, because the sentence he had just spoken was perhaps the bravest thing he had said in 10 years. Emily took a deep breath. "So, the test." She took off her pendant and placed it next to the second one, the 2 half-moons now lying like 2 closed eyelids. "And there's one more thing. I want to go to Lumen." She looked at him directly. "I want to see the place." Leonard nodded. So quickly, it was as if he were afraid he'd change his mind if he delayed. "Tomorrow," he said. 6 a.m. No one else. Elaine gently touched Emily's arm. "When you step into that place, there will be things you'll wish you'd never seen. If at any point you want to turn back, just say so. No answer is worth losing all of yourself for." Emily gave a thin smile. "I know. But tonight I think I've come too far to turn back." She stood up and turned her chair a small angle, a little habit of someone trying to arrange their world into a manageable order. Then she turned to Leonard. "Thank you for not hiding." Leonard nodded. He wanted to say, "I've been hiding for a very long time," but he held back. That sentence was for another moment. Perhaps before the door of a room with cold white lights and a very human fear. The night finished pouring over the city, like ink spreading across the edge of a map. Leonard stood alone before the large window, his fingers touching the cold glass. His reflection looked back at him. A man who had presented to thousands on the structure of truth, but had buried a small truth under the concrete of his reputation. He thought of Claire, of Elaine, of Emily. of Lena. There are names that can turn a person into a rib cage without ribs. His phone buzzed softly. A text from an unknown number. Don't bring her to Lumen. No punctuation, no emojis, just a sentence as dry as stone. Then another. Not every door opens to an exit. Some open to swallow the one who enters. Leonard looked at the screen, then smiled faintly, a smile reserved for a fear that was no longer unfamiliar. He tossed the phone onto a chair and turned his back on the city. Soon, he said to himself, and heard his voice was less shaky. Soon, 10 minutes to 6. The side gate of the Lumen complex wasn't yet open for the administrative shift. Morning dew clung to the glass fence and the stainless steel sign. Emily wore a baseball cap and a gray hoodie, her hands in her pockets, standing next to Leonard like a shadow with a will of its own. Elaine was at home at Claire's insistence, but she had placed her hands on Emily's shoulders before they left, squeezed gently and said, "If it's not okay, say so." Adults sometimes forget to ask that question. The keycard beeped softly. The gate slid open. Inside was the smell of industrial air conditioning and freshly cleaned epoxy floors. A strip of LED lights on the ceiling guided them down a corridor lined with posters proclaiming "Data ethics starts with you," slogans that Leonard knew who wrote, knew the day he approved them, and knew how empty they were when faced with a lab fire. At 2:13 a.m., the frosted glass door of Beta Lab was still there, but the nameplate had been changed. Beta Lab, reconstructed. There was a very fine crack on the corner of the glass, like a healed scar. Leonard entered the code. The door clicked open. Cool air washed over them, along with the smell of new plastic and, somewhere, very faintly, the old scent of something that had been burned but still lingered. Emily stepped inside, her eyes touching each object as if greeting a long-lost relative. She walked to a server rack, her hand gliding over its edge. "The camera was broken before," she said, as if repeating the line from the note. "What about the system logs?" Leonard looked at the adjacent panel and typed a command sequence, so familiar it was shameful. Not everyone loves the syntax they once used for cover-ups. The screen displayed a long list of logs, the timestamps like milestones on a collapsed road. He scrolled to 2:10-2:20. There was a 4-minute gap, a hole so perfect it was unnatural. A manually added note appeared when he clicked "Maint window." He laughed, this time not hiding his sarcasm. A maintenance window at 2 a.m. in a hot-running experimental lab? Emily raised an eyebrow. Convenient for everything. Too convenient. Leonard said. Convenient enough to ask who scheduled that window. Legal? Emily asked. No, Leonard replied, and in the dim light of the lab, his cheekbones stood out, sharp as if they had just been honed. The person who can schedule a maintenance window isn't the legal team. It's someone who knows the system intimately and has authority no one dares to question. He paused, looking at their reflections in the glass. 2 shadows. Someone like me. Emily was silent. This silence wasn't tense, but thick and warm like an old blanket, uncomfortable but preserving. So, you'll rewrite it, she said. We'll erase this gap not in the logs, but in the story. Footsteps in the hallway. Leonard looked up, signaling for silence. They pressed themselves into a corner, their hearts beating in a slow, shared rhythm. The door slid open gently, and a figure slipped inside, tall, thin, in a long coat, holding a clipboard. He looked up, pausing for a second when he saw Leonard. "You're in early, boss," he said, his voice flat as metal. "I thought you were off today." Leonard offered a polite corporate smile. "I'm not off when there's something to remember." He introduced them briefly. "This is Emily." Then he turned to Emily and introduced the man. "This is Marcus, head of infrastructure since day one." Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the girl as quickly as a scanner. His gaze flickered past her baseball cap, pausing for a beat on her neck, where the necklace was just visible beneath her hoodie. He looked back at Leonard. "What do you want here?" "To remember," Leonard repeated. "And to see. We're reopening the 213 report." "That report is closed," Marcus said. "There's nothing left to see." "There's always something to see," Leonard said, pulling out his phone and opening a photo folder. He held up a Polaroid Lena in front of the Lumen sign. "For example, this. Or this." He swiped to another photo, the report with red highlights. "Or this." He held up the napkin with the words, "Keep her." Marcus glanced at it, his eyelid twitching for a fraction of a second, enough for someone trained to read micro-expressions like Elaine to catch, though she wasn't here today. Emily watched the two men, realizing that in this cold steel room, the hottest thing wasn't a processor, but memories that refused to stay put. She suddenly heard her own heart beating with a strange calm, as if all the blood in her body had finally agreed to flow in one direction. "Marcus," Leonard said, his tone no longer polite. "Who scheduled the maintenance window that night?" "We agreed," Marcus began. "There is no we here." Leonard cut him off, his voice for the first time since that evening, carrying a thick, deep tone, the kind boardrooms had heard and believed. "There's just you and me, and a child who was left at a clinic's doorstep at 2:17. Marcus stared at him. For so long it seemed time had stopped. Then he lowered his clipboard and let out a single word, like an exhalation. "You." The word you fell onto the epoxy floor, with no echo, no shatter, but it spread like seeping water. Leonard wasn't surprised. Some answers are born not to surprise, but to leave no room for turning back. "Why?" Emily asked. Not accusingly, just asking. The gentleness of the question made it a thin blade. Marcus shrugged. A sudden, weary gesture. Because there were things more valuable than an alert at the time. A contract, a funding round, tomorrow's headlines, a promise you'd made to too many people. And because... He looked at Emily. Because some children arrive at the wrong time. He paused, as if hearing himself for the first time. The wrong time for the adults. Not for the child. Leonard tilted his head, as if accepting a sentence he had long known was coming. "Thank you," he said, "for telling the truth." Then he turned to Emily. "Now for the next step. The test," Emily reminded him, then hesitated, "and they'll react. They always react," Leonard replied. "But this time, it won't be by turning off a camera." He walked to the door, paused at the threshold, and looked back at the room. The white walls, the air conditioners, the colored cables, a fine crack in the glass. Some places become shrines to things unspoken. Today, he thought, someone would start to speak. On the way back, the car glided along the riverbank. The fog was lifting, revealing the city's sharp, dry edges. Emily looked down at her hands, one resting on top of the other. "I don't know what I'll do if the results are what they are," she said, leaving the sentence unfinished for each of them to fill. "Neither do I," Leonard said. "But I know if we do nothing, everything stays the same. Some scars are meant to remind you to learn to walk, not to be hidden." Emily smiled faintly. "You sound like something people would like." "Then you can help them remember to click," Leonard said. And for the first time, he made the kind of YouTube dad joke Claire always teased him about. "If this story makes you feel something worth keeping, leave a comment. Not for the algorithm, but so people like the old, you know they're not lost." The word slipped out of Leonard lightly, like a tiny prayer. If anyone is listening, don't leave when the door is about to open. As the car entered the tunnel, Leonard received another text from an unknown number. "You just opened a pit with no ladder." He read it and didn't reply. Some threats are best answered with action. He, Elaine, and Emily stepped into the elevator. The mirror showed them three versions of the same person, the one who hid, the one who never knew, and the one walking between two shores. When the door opened, the smell of Elaine's freshly brewed coffee drifted out like a welcome. Claire was on the sofa, hair messy, hugging a pillow, her eyes red from lack of sleep but bright. "I couldn't wait," she said, looking at Emily, then her father, "but I think, no matter what, our family is still our family. And if we have to rebuild, well, we know how." She winked. "You're the turnaround king, Dad." Elaine smiled, placing a mug in front of each of them. "What time is the test?" "In an hour," Leonard said. "Private. No records." "I'm coming with you," Claire said, not casually, but like a small, firm nail. Emily looked at them, surprised to find herself in a warm room where people said "we" as a matter of course. The warmth passed through her hoodie, settled on her sternum, and then melted. "Thank you," she said. One word that was enough, for not making me a topic. For asking if I was okay. Elaine touched her mug to Emily's, gently, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. "You're not a story. You're the storyteller of your life," she said. "If at any point you want to press pause, just say so. No one has the right to press continue for you." Emily nodded. Then she laughed, a sudden, clear sound. "But if I got this far, it wouldn't be bad to get a few subscribers out of it," she said, half joking, glancing at Leonard. The whole table laughed, a tired but genuine sound. In that laughter, Leonard knew they had just navigated a dangerous curve without losing control. There were still steep hills ahead, falling rocks, and the letter L, radiating like a symbol calling to many names. But in this moment, he found he could breathe. Deeply. His chest aching a little, but breathing. The door to the testing lab closed behind them, the smell of antiseptic filling the air. The technician said little, worked quickly, the white cotton swabs gliding across their cheeks. Emily looked into Leonard's eyes again as her sample was placed in a vial. No words were needed. Some answers would arrive by email, with a few words and many consequences. When they stepped out, it was already noon, a large patch of bright clouds hanging over the river. Leonard's phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't an unknown number, but an address he once knew too well. The email address of someone who had resigned for personal reasons 18 years ago. The subject line: "If you've decided to open the door, watch this video before you take another step." Attached was an internal link leading to an old server that only the first-generation Lumen employees would remember. Leonard looked up at the sky, squinting against the light. "The next step," he said, half to Emily, half to himself. "And maybe this will be the last time I let someone else write the hardest chapter." He clicked the link. The screen went black for a second, then a familiar yet strange scene appeared. Beta lab on a rainy night, from a high-angle camera. A dark-haired woman in a lab coat, holding a small bundle wrapped in a jacket, ran across the frame. A man followed, bending down to pick up something that fell the metallic glint of a half-moon pendant before catching up. The timestamp in the corner jumped from 2 hours 12 minutes and 57 seconds to 2 hours 13 minutes and 1 second, and then the video glitched, the lights flickered, the frame went black. When it came back, there was only smoke. In the corner, the maint window note was superimposed over the time like a cheap bandage on a deep wound. Emily held her breath. So did Leonard. There are moments you don't relive, but you live them fully for the first time. "Let's go," Emily said, her voice very soft but not trembling. "Let's go to the place they left me, and from there, we'll pick ourselves up." Leonard nodded, his eyes suddenly wet. "Let's go." If you have ever been on the verge of a hard truth and still chose to move forward, leave a message for those who are still hesitating. Not to get this story more views, but so that someone, tonight, when opening a similar door, knows they are not alone. Leonard turned off the video. The screen went dark, but the image remained seared on his retina, like a burn. The way Lena held the small bundle, her rain-soaked hair stuck to her cheeks, the glint of the falling necklace. It wasn't just an image, it was the echo of a promise he hadn't dared to keep. Emily sat opposite him, the light from the window casting a thin line on her cheekbone. Her breathing was even but deep, showing she was holding herself back from asking 1,000 questions at once. They were silent. And in that silence, the sounds of the city outside car horns, the wet slap of shoes on the pavement, seemed to come from another world. "Is there another copy of this video somewhere?" Emily asked, her voice soft but tight, like someone holding a string they didn't want to break. Leonard shook his head. "This is the only version I've ever seen from that angle. All the other cameras were marked for maintenance during that exact time frame. But who sent it to you?" Emily tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. Leonard looked at the sender's name, an email address he once knew by heart. Someone, who disappeared right after the fire, said he resigned for personal reasons. But I knew. He disappeared because he knew too much. He paused for a beat, as if considering whether to say the name. His name is Carter Hayes. He was Lumen's head of data security back then. Emily nodded slowly, committing the name to memory. "Where is he now?" "I don't know," Leonard admitted. "But if he could send this video, it means he's still watching everything. It means he has a reason for wanting us to see it." A glint of determination flashed in Emily's eyes, the kind of resolve from someone who grew up having to unlock every door they encountered on their own. "Then we find him." Leonard smiled wearily. "It won't be easy. Carter is the kind of person who can erase his tracks even while standing right in front of you. But," he paused, pulling a small black USB drive from his pocket, "I have one more thing in my safe that he sent me years ago. No name, no label, just an L engraved with a laser." Emily took the USB, turning it over in her hands. "Let's open it." Leonard frowned slightly. "If Carter is still the same, this drive will be encrypted. If we enter the wrong password, it will wipe all the data." "Then let's find the password," Emily said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. She stood up and walked over to Leonard's desk. "Is there anything Carter ever left behind? A saying, a date, something he was always attached to?" Leonard thought for a moment. Then his eyes lit up. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old Lumen ID card. On the back was a string of numbers: 0213200007. "The opening day of the beta lab," he said. "The day Lena officially started full-time." Emily plugged the USB into the laptop and typed in the numbers. The screen flickered, then a single folder appeared, named Lena's Light. Inside were a series of files, photos, documents, and one video. Emily opened the video first. The image was shaky, clearly filmed covertly with a personal device. Lena was sitting in a small lab, a circuit board and a screen displaying lines of green code in front of her. Her voice was tired, but steady. "If you're watching this, it means I don't have time to explain in person. The system has detected a deviation in the thermal analysis algorithm. I've sent 3 reports, but they were blocked. Tonight, they want to run a new model at full capacity. I don't believe it's safe. And I have a decision to make." Leonard swallowed hard. He remembered that night clearly, even the text Lena had sent him. "Are you there?" He hadn't answered. In the video, Lena continued, "If things go wrong, I'm not staying. I'm taking my most precious thing out of here. You'll understand when you see." She bent down and lifted a small bundle from the corner of her desk. Gently unwrapping it, inside was a baby, wrapped in a white blanket, its eyes wide and curious. Emily held her breath. Lena kissed the baby's forehead and whispered, "We'll find a safe place, even if we have to leave everything behind." The video ended there, the screen going black. Emily sat silently, Her hands clenched. "That was me," she said, almost in a whisper. Leonard didn't reply, but his eyes said enough. He brought a hand to his mouth, covering a trembling breath. They both sat in silence for another few minutes before Emily spoke. "So, if Lena was my mother, who was my father?" Leonard looked directly at her. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but Carter might. Or at least, he knows who wanted you to disappear from the story." Emily nodded, her gaze turning cold and sharp as a newly honed blade. "Then we find Carter. And we find them." Leonard let out a long breath. Finding them means stepping into a territory where everything I've ever built could collapse. But he looked straight at Emily. "If you want to, I will go with you." Emily responded with a firm nod. "Let's go." The next day, Leonard used all his old connections to trace Carter. The clues led them to a small coastal town where the waves crashed against the stone sea wall with a relentless roar. An old coffee shop, its sign faded, was where Carter was said to frequent. Leonard and Emily walked in, the smell of roasted coffee and sea salt mingling in the air. A man sat in a dark corner, tall and thin, with graying hair, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses even indoors. "Carter Hayes?" Leonard asked as they approached. The man looked up, and a thin smile appeared on his lips. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find me," he said, his voice as raspy as the sea wind. His gaze shifted to Emily, pausing for a beat on her neck where the half-moon necklace still lay. "And this must be Emily," she introduced herself, her voice steady. Carter nodded slowly. "What do you know about the fire?" Leonard cut straight to the point. Carter took a sip of coffee, then set the cup down, his eyes never leaving them. "I know it was no accident. I know Lena had discovered something the people at the top didn't want revealed. And I know," he looked directly at Emily, "that this girl is the only reason Lena made it out of there in time." Emily leaned forward. Carter was silent for a long moment, as if weighing each word. "That man is still alive, and he's still much closer to power than you think, Leonard." Leonard frowned. "Who are you talking about?" Carter just smirked. "I'll tell you. But first, you need to know that they aren't just a few individuals. It's an entire network, and the fire was just one of many times they covered their tracks. If you want the truth, you have to be willing to tear down the whole network." Emily didn't blink. "I'm willing." Leonard looked at her and saw in her eyes the image of the old Lena, a gaze that refused to back down. He knew that from here, there was no turning back. The morning sea breeze blew through the cafe's open door, making the faded cloth curtain tremble. Carter sat still, his fingers tapping lightly on the side of his coffee cup as if counting time. Leonard had his arms crossed, his gaze locked on him, while Emily leaned slightly forward, ready to catch every word like a soldier awaiting orders. "Who is he?" Emily asked again, her voice no longer the trembling question of a child seeking her father, but a straight arrow. Carter sighed, resting his forehead in his hand for a moment before looking up. "His name is Richard Alden." Leonard blinked. "Alden? The current chairman of Lumen's board?" "Exactly," Carter nodded. "And one of the men who signed the order to block Lena's reports before the fire. He has every reason to keep quiet, not just to protect the company, but to protect himself." Emily stiffened, her knuckles turning white. "Why?" she asked, her voice even, but her eyes beginning to stir. Carter looked at her, long and slow. "Because he's your father." The words fell on the table like a heavy stone dropped into a still pond. Leonard tilted his head but said nothing. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, as if her body needed time to absorb and process the truth that had just pierced her chest. When she opened them, they were blazing not with happiness or relief, but with a fire mixed with anger and a thirst for answers. "Does he know about me?" Emily asked. "He knows," Carter replied, his tone as definitive as a nail being hammered in, "and he chose to ensure no one else would." Leonard leaned forward, his hands tightening. "Carter, do you have any proof? If Alden really is Emily's father and he was involved in covering up the fire, we'll need more than just words." Carter smiled thinly. "I do. But if I hand it over, you and she will have no way back. Everything will erupt: the press, the board, investors, the federal government. Once you cross that line, you'll be living in a firestorm until it's over." Emily sat up straight. "If I don't, I'll live my whole life in the dark. I choose the fire." Leonard glanced at her. And in that moment, he saw a part of Lena, resurrected, not in her face or figure, but in the way she stood tall in the face of danger. Carter opened his old cloth bag and pulled out a heavy envelope. "In here is a copy of Lumen's Series B investment contract from 18 years ago. It has Alden's signature, and underneath is a secret addendum. Internal incident mitigation costs, the very budget code used to silence those who knew about the fire. Along with that is your original birth certificate, Emily, with no father's name, but the signature of the attending physician, is Alden's private doctor." Emily took the envelope, the thick paper feeling like a heavy heart in her hands. She didn't open it right away. "What else?" Carter nodded slowly. "A recording. Lena called me from the hospital corridor right before she disappeared. She said, 'If they find her, they'll take her from me. If Leonard asks, tell him I'm sorry. And tell him to protect her, because she's all that's left of me and—'" Carter paused, looking at Emily. "And of Alden." The small room suddenly felt a few inches smaller. Leonard took a deep breath. The smell of sea salt and roasted coffee rushed in, but it couldn't mask the bitterness rising from his throat to his stomach. Emily opened her eyes and looked directly at Leonard. "So, what now?" Leonard leaned forward on the table, close to her. "Now, we force him to face the truth. But not just in a closed room, in front of everyone." Carter frowned slightly. "Going public will be dangerous. Alden is an old fox, he'll hit back hard." "That's exactly why," Leonard said, his voice like steel. "We have to make sure he has no time to hit back, and our weapon will be this very evidence." Emily smiled faintly. "We'll burn down the network he used as cover." Carter leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I'll make the arrangements. But once we start, no one can back down." Emily tilted her head. "I'm not backing down." Leonard looked at her, their eyes meeting in a silent agreement. No contract needed, no oath sworn. 3 days later, an emergency board meeting was scheduled at the Lumen headquarters. The 50th floor conference room, surrounded by glass walls, overlooked the city like a brightly lit chessboard. The board members sat in a circle, papers and laptops open. At the head of the table sat Richard Alden, in a dark blue suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, a faint smile that Leonard knew was a formidable shield. "Leonard," Alden said as he walked in, "I hear you have some important information to share." Leonard placed a laptop on the table, next to the envelope from Carter. "This information concerns the Beta Lab fire from all those years ago and someone present here." Alden raised an eyebrow, but maintained his calm demeanor. "That's old news. No need to dredge it up." Emily walked in, her head held high. A wave of murmurs rippled across the table as all eyes turned to her. She didn't sit, but stood beside Leonard. Leonard played the video of Lena. The room fell silent. At the moment Lena held Emily in her arms, Alden's eyes changed just for a fraction of a second, but long enough for Leonard to catch. He paused the video, zoomed in on Lena's face looking into the camera, and let the silence hang. "That's my mother," Emily said, her voice even and clear. And my father is sitting in this room. A few board members turned their heads toward Alden. He remained still, the faint smile slowly disappearing. Leonard placed the envelope in front of him. The Series B contract, the secret addendum, the birth certificate, and the recording. If necessary, I will release all of it to the public. Alden looked at him, then at Emily. You don't understand the power game, child, he said, his voice still deep, but having lost its smoothness. Some things, if made public, will destroy more than they save. Emily didn't back down. Destroying what deserves to crumble is not a sin. The air in the room grew thick, as if even oxygen was hesitating to pass through the tension. Leonard leaned toward Alden. Richard, it's time for everyone to see who you really are. This girl's father, and the man who chose to burn down a part of his company to keep that secret. Alden clenched his hands on the table but didn't respond. Leonard knew at this moment his shield had cracked, and everyone in the room had seen it. The boardroom was as silent as if all the air had been sucked out. All eyes were on Alden, who remained seated, back straight, hands clasped, like a breathing